Okay, we'll get started now. It'll be a bit smaller this week, but hopefully we'll have more join us, or else welcome to those who are watching after the fact. On this week's town hall, I wanted to talk a bit about humanist values in the time of a pandemic, in the time of COVID-19. Uh, Things are shifting fast, but I think the values that humanism stands for, reason, compassion, hope. Apologies for that interruption. My internet seemed to have disappeared for a second. Usual glitches. As I was talking about, we wanted to talk about humanism in a time of crisis, in a time of pandemic right now. The values that I think we stand for are as relevant today as they always are. Reason, compassion, and hope. Before we begin, though, I do want to begin with territorial acknowledgement. I've forgotten it the last couple of times because we are in a little bit of a weird situation where everyone is at home, which can be on many different territories. I'm here in Burnaby, which is the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. So I thank them for being able to use these lands. The first element of humanist values in COVID-19 that I want to discuss is how do we combat misinformation and how do we use science and reason in these times? I posted a blog recently about this in the past week, talking about combating misinformation and its challenge. And the challenge is that it's everywhere. We see a lot of people spreading conspiracy theories, lots of different challenges out there, bad information. But even beyond just the stuff that's obviously bunk and dangerous, there's a lot of information out there, and that can just be very difficult to process and to go through. So the ways that I think we can approach this are the ways that we can always approach information is with science and evidence, and the best reasonable approaches we always use. For me personally, that is a combination of relying on reputable sources, but also trying to find those sources who are best at releasing showing their work, showing their underlying data. So I've been personally relying a lot on BC's provincial health officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, and the BC Centre for Disease Control. They have put out a lot of information, especially as time has moved forward. Their modeling information is all online, how they're making these decisions and what underlying science is motivating everything. And I think that's been really helpful. Health Canada has also been a great source of information. The charts available there can tell you a lot. And then there's a lot of skeptic organizations like Science-Based Medicine that are helping trying to break down what is good and what is not good information. And so approaching some of those is always helpful. I've talked in the past about the value of mainstream media in these discussions. I think a lot of them are doing a great job, CBC, National Post, but the challenge with science right now is there's so much coming so fast, and there's not a lot of great science journalists out there. So making sense of information like what is a pre-published study and is that something people can rely on is a challenge. There was a report I saw in the LA Times about a new pre-published study suggesting there's a second variant of COVID-19 of the novel coronavirus going around. And maybe that explains why there's different infection rates in different countries. The problem is we don't know if that's good science or not. We don't have enough data. People haven't reviewed it. And so reporting on that can sound really sensationalist, but we don't have a good sense of if it's true or not, because I'm not an expert on immunology and these kind of things. So finding good science is always tough. And so take everything you read in the media with a little bit of grain of salt. Look for those flags. Do they mention that it's a published study? Do they talk about what the size of the sample? As we start to see more data come out about trials and vaccines, some will mention the size of the trial. If it's a very small trial, we probably don't know if it's a good study or not until we have more and more data. And then there's the other realm, which is just the dangerous, what I'm calling the danger zone of just unreputable information, the conspiracy theories, things that maybe you have a gut sense are wrong, or maybe you have a gut sense, they play to your emotion in general. Early on, this included things like you could gargle with hot water to kill coronavirus, and they don't cite their sources. And so finding the tools to combat this is important. One of the things I go back to is what Carl Sagan called the bullshit detection system. Sorry, his baloney detection kit. Try to find independent confirmation of the facts, encourage debate by knowledgeable experts. Don't rely too much on authority because there are no authorities in science. Look for the evidence as opposed to who is saying it. You need to have people challenging different hypotheses. Don't get overly attached to a hypothesis just because it's yours. And think about Occam's razor, just the idea that sometimes the simplest explanation, the one that has the least extra elements, is often the most correct. So this vast conspiracy that so-and-so developed this to cause this to do that is unlikely to be the case. And then there's lots of other good resources. Tim Caulfield, who's a University of Alberta professor of health policy, wrote a good piece in Nature recently about the importance of researchers getting out there and being more vocal to talk about combating misinformation. We have a number of scientists on our board and in our organization, including Dr. Katie Marshall, Dr. Rob Tarswell is one of our members, who've spoken a lot about misinformation and tried to find the good data out there and the good information and to break down the myth from facts. So trying to find those kind of informations is important. And the other half of humanism is the compassion. It's not just the reason and how do we understand the world, but how do we put our values in play? And so one of the things I've been starting to think about more, and we'll be writing a longer series of blog posts on, is how can members, how can humanists give back to the community, and how can we support one another? I think the first trick is, or the first step is to start local, to start as close as you can to home, because that's where you probably have the most motivation to help. So think about your friends, your family, people in your neighborhood who might need help, might need groceries picked up for them, little things you can do, even just calling your friends and family to make sure they're okay, doing more voice video chats and things like this, and keeping connected with people is really important. Going up beyond that to the next realm, the next circle is your community. Make sure you're supporting local businesses that you like, because that keeps people in your neighborhood employed, and then they can keep food on their table. Volunteer with local nonprofits who are looking for support. One big one in Metro Vancouver is DTES Response, Downtown Eastside Response.ca. They're coordinating a lot of the support for people who are living in the Downtown East Side, where additional help is always needed. And Canada Blood Services is actually looking for a lot more donors right now. It's always challenging with donating blood because I know many humanists are concerned about their policy of rejecting of gay men's blood, and that's a personal choice you have to make. They do need more blood, and so if you can donate, I would encourage it, but it's a personal decision. And then going beyond that, humanists do like to think at the international level, beyond just your immediate family, your friends, to the around the world. So we're going to be working on setting up a fundraiser for an international charity, likely Doctors Without Borders, but I'm curious if anyone has any other ideas about charities that are secular and are supporting COVID-19 support in other areas of the world. And it's also important to just write your politicians with your concerns, whether you're MLA, your city councillor, or a federal MP, about the supports you need, about the supports you think the community needs. Encourage them to stick to the science and evidence. I know some politicians in Canada and the States especially are talking about lifting restrictions, opening up the economy. And while in some provinces in Canada where they aren't seeing many cases, that might make sense. But in many cases, I think people are very concerned that that's putting economic priorities ahead of human lives. And that's a dangerous precedent that more people should be speaking up about. So trying to make sure that these values are reflected in the world we want to see, and talking about, how can we help one another. We have a few people on the call. I'm willing to take any questions from any of you who are on the line, if you had any thoughts or questions or comments on any of that. I think one of the challenges we're all facing is, how long is this going to go forward, and how long are we all going to be in lockdown, and what are the next steps? This afternoon at 3 o'clock, Premier John Horgan is going to be making his announcements about what BC's plan forward is going to be. As far as I can kind of read the tea leaves, it sounds like it'll be recommending a sort of slow and gradual reopening of your social circles, while still making sure that we're protecting the most vulnerable and doing what we can to limit spread. Dr. Bonnie Henry had the comment the other day about fewer faces and larger spaces. So maybe you can meet up with people, but you have to think very hard about, if I meet up with this other person, how many people have they met up with, and making sure that you're still keeping the chances of infection and spread low. And these are decisions that need to be made by the evidence, by your own personal values and what situation you're in. For me personally, we'll probably not be going out too much more than we already are, which is the occasional Costco trip and walks. But hopefully, at some point we can at least go into coffee shops again and sit on a patio. Well, if there are no questions, I'm not seeing any questions on Facebook. Maybe we'll make it a little bit shorter of a check-in this week. Thanks to those of you who are able to either watch along on Facebook, or I see one in the chat. Is Oak Ridge holding our spot? Asked Fior. Yes, we have it booked. We've paid up until the end of June, and then the plan for the Sunday meetings after that is still in the air. We're going to have to discuss with them about whether we continue to meet there. We're not sure when Sunday meetings will resume as they had been. There's no requirement that we were never required to shut them down, but we did so out of an abundance of caution, and as I think was warranted. I think it'll still be at least a couple months before we seriously look at opening them. And there is a volunteer committee that's running those now that'll make a recommendation to the board about when to open those up. I believe there's no urgency. There's no demand on Oak Ridge Senior Center to kick us out of there because no one else is really meeting. So I'm not worried about losing that space. And in terms of other in-person meetings, I think we will be looking across the province at what's going on and what the recommendations coming out this afternoon and over the next few weeks and months are about in-person events, and recommending to other organizations what to do and when. I think there's been some value to these online events. We are able to reach more people, both across Metro Van and across the province. As you're also pointing out, there's lots of events going on. Dying with Dignity has a webinar right now as well, so that's undoubtedly where some people are. There's always lots of things going on, and the value is that at least all of these can be captured online and people can watch them at their leisure as well. So thank you all, and I'll see about checking in next week as well. I may take a week off just to see how it goes, if that makes a difference in attendance. But otherwise, thank you who took the time, and have a good week.